Hello and welcome to Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds, How American Culture Came to Be, the podcast at the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. I'm Alex.
And I'm Rachel. Today we're answering your burning questions about how the museum decides what goes where on our sites. We've got our curator, David Puckett, with us to introduce you to some principles and challenges of curation.
What's your background and how long have you been at the Frontier Culture Museum?
Well, Alex, I've been at the museum since 1999. I started as the assistant registrar, a position that was responsible for implementing policies and procedures related to caring for our permanent collection, which is our historic artifact collection. And I received my bachelor's degree in history from the University of Florida and a master's in public history from the University of South Carolina. And my duties here at the museum include caring for the permanent collection, the material cultural research, and exhibits.
How do you go about deciding what to put in one of the houses? What resources do you need? Basically, just walk us through furnishing a site from top to bottom.
At the Frontier Culture Museum, we do living history interpretation, and our sites, our farms, outdoor exhibits are representative. That is, our farmhouses are not documenting an occupation period by a specific individual or family. And also, the interpretive approach that we use suggests the use of reproductions as furnishings will be handled by staff and visitors. The interpretive plan is important. A historic furnishings report for a farmhouse must support the interpretive plan for that exhibit. To start with, I like to become knowledgeable about the time period, study national, state, and local histories. We also do study sources specific to the property, such as genealogical sources about the occupants, archaeological surveys, any other historical records associated with the building and its occupants, public records such as wills, probate inventories, deeds, and census records. For example, the family that lived in our 1820s farmhouse had a legal dispute over the settlement of the estate in 1816. But without going into the details of the case, I will say that the depositions taken in this case offered insights into family relations, daily life, even the use of space within the household. And also for a representative site, you will also need to study the county and neighborhood and where the house was located. For example, when researching furnishings for the 1820s and 1850s farmhouses, I identified probate inventories of individuals of the same ethnic group and or socioeconomic status who lived in the same county and or a neighboring county such as the family that lived in the house. Sometimes the inventory can provide clues about the architecture of the individual's house, which may let me know if is similar to the house I'm trying to furnish. And based on these inventories, I was able to develop a more or less typical repertoire of household furnishings, and the historic furnishing reports for these sites were based on that list.
Do you always know what something looks like from an inventory description? Example, catalogs, images.
Typically from the inventory itself, no. In most cases, the only description provided in a probate inventory is maybe the material a piece of furniture was made out of, such as walnut, cherry, pine, and sometimes also the color if the piece of furniture was painted, for example, a painted chest. And usually it's only, this level of description is only provided for the more valuable items, such as furniture. And to make things even more confusing, terminology can be a problem. People in the past may have used a different name to describe a particular object. For example, a chest of drawers was often referred to as a bureau in the 19th century. To find what an object listed in an inventory might have looked like, it will be necessary to find extant examples or good photographic evidence in a secondary source. I've also used paintings from the period in question as evidence. And where can you find these examples if they aren't in our collection? Other museums, private collections, places like that. Auction catalogs can also be very helpful, as auction houses that specialize in antiques will often have a lot of information about the pieces that are published in their online and or print catalogs of upcoming sales.
How do you decide between artifacts and reproductions?
Well, Rachel, our first preference for furnishing a farmhouse is to use reproductions. The museum in the pre-COVID period really emphasized hands-on programming, and the fact that the visitors could go into all of the rooms of our historic structures really kind of dictated this approach. Reproductions just work better in this environment. Obviously, we want to preserve original artifacts to the greatest extent possible, but reproductions also hold up better to daily wear and tear than artifacts. Also, our historic structures are not climate controlled and are occasionally visited by rodents and insects and other pests. That being said, there are some artifacts on display in our historic structures. Not every artifact can be easily replicated today, including some items that would have been very commonplace in most households and farms in the past. For example, cast ironware, such as pots, stoves, things like that. It's really hard to find good reproductions of some of those items. So in some cases, we do use artifacts. But we can also use artifacts because not every artifact is all that rare. For example, tools were mass-produced in the 19th century, and tools from the 19th century are still very common, and if given new handles, will still work very well. But this is often a judgment call on the part of myself. Is the item rare or significant? Will it hold up to daily use? So I have to ask myself questions like that when deciding whether or not to put an artifact on one of our living history farms.
How do you find the reproductions?
Well, there are a lot of vendors out there who cater to the reenactment community. Often these items aren't the best quality or the most historically accurate, so you kind of have to use your judgment, but they can be a good source for inexpensive reproductions for use in programs. Market fairs, settler fairs are actually a good place to find a lot of these vendors if you can't find them online. There are a lot of artisans out there, potters, metalsmiths, gunsmiths, cabinet makers, who make reproductions, good quality reproductions of historic objects. I've had some long relationships with some of these craftspeople, and some are willing to make these items to our specifications. For example, the potter I've worked with has made pottery for almost all of our exhibits based on the correct types and styles for each exhibit, based on the information I provide her. The museum also has a team of volunteers who can build furniture and other wood items, and forged ironware can be made by our blacksmiths in the Irish Forge, and we also have a volunteer tinsmith as well. And when commissioning reproductions, either from outside vendors or in-house staff and volunteers, we rely on photographic evidence or physical prototypes to ensure the accurate recreation of these historic pieces. A number of our pieces from our permanent collection have been copied for use on farm sites.
What does historical accuracy mean in terms of furnishing a specific house?
Well, Rachel, it can mean different things depending on how and you want to do your interpretation, what you are interpreting. For the Frontier Culture Museum, it means that the furnishings are supported by research that suggests a typical repertoire of furnishings for a certain socioeconomic class at a certain time and place. If we do know how one of our houses was furnished historically, this information will inform the historic furnishings report, but we don't rely on that exclusively as we are not documenting one specific family at our outdoor farm exhibits. However, programmatic considerations can also help determine furnishings. We may include certain items or quantities of items that were not common historically to support a certain interpretive program that we want to do with that particular exhibit.
What do small details like paint color or silverware design add to the visitor experience?
Well, I think it creates a more immersive environment. A recreated historic interior can create a more direct and intimate link to the past. Visitors see where a group of people lived and worked, where the processes of daily life took place. And I think it really makes history feel more real and immediate.
What kind of collections does the museum have, and where do they come from?
Well, the museum has three collections. We have a permanent collection, which is our historic artifact collection. We have the program collection, which is mainly reproductions. And we also have a living collection, a livestock collection. The permanent collection, I explained before, consists of original artifacts and also archival collections. program collection consists of reproductions and some older items that are used in living history programming. Most of the permanent collection was donated to the museum, acquired locally, although we do have some collections from Germany and England, even a small number of African items. We have a wide variety of artifacts, mostly household items, tools, textiles, things like that. Unfortunately, many of our early acquisitions, the pieces that were acquired early in the museum's history, really no longer fit with our mission or our interpretive objectives. This happens a lot in the museum world as institutions grow and evolve, and in the future we may have to undertake something called deaccessioning, which is removing items from our collection.
Why have collections of artifacts if we don't display them?
For us, these artifacts can't be studied. They can be used for references when researching the Historic Furnishings Report, as many of the artifacts in our collection have been copied, and these reproductions are displayed and used in our farmhouses. And the museum's future plan calls for a larger welcome center with a large, about 8,000 square foot permanent exhibit gallery and a small temporary exhibit space that will allow us to display more of our collection. So we do hope to get more of our artifact collection on display in the future.
Which house or period is your favorite to work on and why? And which is your least favorite?
I don't know if I really have a least favorite. They all have some appeal. Some are more challenging to research than others because of the lack of documentation. There's also a language barrier for when dealing with sources, for example, the German farm exhibit. I would have to say my favorite is probably the 1820s American farm, as it was the first new exhibit that was initiated during my time here. And the Historic Furnishings plan for the 1820s farm was the first one I ever researched and wrote. So, yeah, I'd have to say that's probably my favorite one.
What are the biggest changes and challenges you've covered at the Frontier Culture Museum?
I would say probably the biggest change is the addition of the West African farm and the American Indian exhibit. I have to admit the museum was somewhat Eurocentric when I started working here. It had just begun to address slavery and race on the 1850s American farm exhibit, but I think when we built the West African farm and the American Indian exhibits, that's when we first really got into addressing the history of non-white people in this part of Virginia. I'd say the biggest challenge has probably been caring for the permanent collection because the museum does not have a great deal of storage and exhibit space, as I alluded to earlier. So it's been kind of a challenge to make sure that these collections are cared for properly. And also it's been a challenge to get some of this collection out on display. We do have some interesting pieces in our collection that I think the public likes to see.
So we're changing over the German Anbau, which is set up as a cooper shop right now, into a tailor shop. Can you walk us through the process of how we do that from top to finish?
Yes, the Anbau is always, I guess I'll back up and say that the Anbau has always been a little bit problematic for us at the German farm because that particular part of the house did not exist in the 18th century, which is the period we interpret at that exhibit. It is actually kind of an interesting space in and of itself because it added onto the house in the 19th century because the house became a two-family house at that point in time. And so that does kind of speak to the overpopulation that was occurring in that part of the world in the Rhineland in the late 18th century, early 19th century, that maybe not all families had a household to themselves. We made the decision a long time ago not to really address the Anbau in that way, just because it was from a later time period. So originally we set it up as a sort of a weaving shop. We had a loom in there because some of our early research indicated that maybe a family like that would have been practicing a trade like weaving in order to generate some more income for the family. Because, of course, peasants might not all peasants had enough farmland on which to support the household. So many of them were having to engage in secondary trades in these small farming villages in southwestern Germany. But part of the issue that we have here at the museum is the skills of our staff kind of change from time to time. We didn't have as many weavers on staff, but we were starting to get a pretty good crew of woodworkers on our staff. They were being trained to do coopering and things like that. Unfortunately, a lot of these individuals left to in search of other opportunities. And right now at the museum, we actually do have a lot of people who are very good at sewing and tailoring. So that's kind of the genesis of why we decided to turn that particular room into a tailor's shop or a tailor's workspace. And so what we've been doing is doing some research on trades in German villages, how these tradespeople would have operated, how they would have functioned. Would they be working out of their own house? Would they have a separate shop? Trying to answer questions like that. We've also been trying to figure out how a tailor's shop or a tailor's workspace would have been furnished or how it would have been configured in the 18th century. And we've been relying a lot on, there are actually a number of 18th century illustrations and paintings of tailor shop. Unfortunately, not as many specific to that part of Germany, but generally European shops. So we've been doing that too. And we think we know what kinds of furniture we need, sort of what the space will look like. We haven't answered all the questions yet, so we're kind of still in the research phase. But we think we have a good direction. We're going in a good direction.
Of all the reproductions and permanent collections we have at the museum, do you have one particular piece that is your favorite?
I like different things for different reasons. I kind of got into some of the furniture that is in the 1820s house, like the corner cupboard, the clock case. Those are among my favorites. And part of that's just because I did the research that suggested those items would be appropriate. But I also really like the press cupboard in the English house, too.
All right, Rachel, do you have a favorite piece at the museum?
My very favorite piece based on craftsmanship is the small chest of drawers in the 1820s bedroom. Just because it's such a beautiful piece that was done by one of our volunteers.
And also, the wood that was used in that chest came from a tree that grew on the museum property as well. I think it was a cherry tree that came down when they moved the octagonal barn here. And maybe Alex remembers that more than I do, but because I wasn't here at that time. But from what I understand, when they cut down that tree, they sawed it up into planks, and the planks were stored in the one of the upper stories of the German farmhouse for many years. So it was very good wood. I mean, it was completely dry, so we didn't have to worry about it warping or anything like that. And I made our volunteer woodworker aware of it, a man by the name of George Watt, and he came up with this idea for making a chest of drawers. And that piece is also interesting because it sort of indicates the level of a certain level of acculturation among the Virginia Germans in this part of Virginia in the early 19th century. Most German peasants had chests to store their clothes and other personal belongings. The chest of drawers was, you saw that more among Anglo-Virginians. It was a piece that kind of evolved starting in the 17th century. as people acquired more and more clothing, they wanted to have a piece of furniture that would allow them to store their clothing, organize their clothing, and the chest of drawers obviously does a better job of that than a chest. And so presumably as these Virginia Germans, after they got to this country, became more prosperous, they in turn started owning more and more items, more and more textiles, clothing, things like that. So they adopted the chest of drawers in their own home.
My favorite piece is, you already mentioned it, the press covered on our English farm, and it is a real beautiful carved piece. And I liked it so much, my wife and I looked at seeing if we could acquire one for our house, and found out that we do not earn enough money to even think about acquiring something like that. So we just admire it at the museum all the time.
So you mentioned that non-artifacts are also part of the collection as well. You also are technically in charge of the costuming. The actual, how people are portrayed on site themselves, not just in what they're using and what the houses are furnished in. Can you talk a little bit about the costume plan?
Right. We, of course, have done some research that we have on file for how people should be dressed for the particular time periods, and which is it poses some challenges because obviously in the time periods that we deal with, there's not a lot of photographic evidence. We're looking at a lot of paintings, some written descriptions of how people looked and how people dressed in the past. And the problem with these sources, certainly in the cases of paintings, the visual portrayal might be idealized, or it might be the wrong socioeconomic class, maybe an upper class individual that would not probably be dressing quite the same way as someone who was lower in rank in society. Also, the problem with written descriptions is that in a lot of cases, people who are writing these things down were focusing on the unusual and not the ordinary and common. So you've got to be aware of these problems when you're dealing with sources. But through research, we have determined that in most places and at most times that we deal with, people are dressing more or less the same regardless of their socioeconomic class. The big difference is material. Obviously, upper class individuals are dressing in a lot of silks, finer woolens, and linens, things like that, whereas the common people are dressing in coarser material. But the cut of the clothing is more or less the same. So we do have that. I guess you could say that's something of an advantage.
Well, thank you, David. Hopefully our listeners now have a better idea of what the work that goes into planning and furnishing a historic site.
So we hope you enjoy Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds. We'll bring you historical episodes twice a month. You can check out the Frontier Culture Museum online at frontiermuseum.org, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You'll find background on all the farms at the museum, information on upcoming events, and so much more.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider visiting the website and clicking the donate button. Donations to the American Frontier Culture Foundation support programs like field trips, summer camp, and special events. We greatly appreciate it. See you next time.